I'm Dr. Tasia White, and you're listening to Things My Boss Never Told Me. Hello, and welcome to episode number 13 of Things My Boss Never Told Me. I am your gracious host, Dr. Tasia White, and I am so excited for this episode because in this episode, I have invited my first guest to share their leadership story with us. So if you think back to episode number 12, I talked about my leadership journey. And I felt that the next phase of this podcast should really focus on other people's journeys and having them share their experiences and their insights and their perspective on leadership. And I am super excited because our first guest is actually someone with whom I used to supervise. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kevin Turner and have him introduce himself.
Well, hello, everyone. First of all, Dr. White, thank you so much for inviting me on your podcast. I count it an honor and a privilege not only to have worked with you, but to have gotten to know you over the years even more outside of supervising. And I'm just super excited to be here today. So I guess the best way to start this, to talk a little bit about myself, I'm a native of the Eastern Shore. I graduated from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County in the class of 2006. I took a little stint from education and worked a little bit in corporate America and retail and sales before landing a job as a assistant manager at Hollister before I realized that I wanted to go into the military to do something different. So I went into the military and did that. When I came out of boot camp, I decided I wanted to go back to school to get my master's because I knew that was always something that I wanted to do. So I enrolled back in school right away. I got a master's and then ended up getting another master's. And then my first professional job that I worked out of grad school was at a school called Livingstone College. That's kind of where I got my start in higher ed. While in grad school, I did do a little bit of work as like a graduate RA, graduate resident mentor with some students with autism spectrum disorder, to kind of get my feet wet with res life to see if that was something I really wanted to do. But my first professional role was at Livingstone College, and I was there from 2014 to 2016, which brings me to 2016, where I met Dr. Tasia. Yeah, 7 long years ago. We met in 2016. I was a young whippersnapper. I can remember it like it was yesterday. I was super excited to be at Junietta. Junietta was a very special place. Never had heard anything about the college. And so I was hired as the residential life coordinator. We shared 2 beautiful years together before I decided to kind of expand my career portfolio and start to market myself out into housing operations more than residence life, particularly where I had a staff and I was working with RAs. So I took a position at Howard University and was there for about 9 months before realizing that I needed something a little bit more challenging, and housing operations is a lot more challenging in terms of, not saying that residence life isn't, but housing, you're dealing with numbers, you're dealing with bed counts, and you have to stay on top of things. And I needed something to keep my brain working. And
logistical stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember a conversation that me and you had shortly before I had left, kind of like talking about what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go in life. And of course, not trying to leave Junietta just to leave Junietta, but I knew that I was trying to be closer to family and kind of position myself in a different area. And so took the job at Howard, did that for 9 months, and was like, no, I need something a little bit more challenging. So I was fortunate to land a role as the assistant director of residence life at Goucher College. And I was there for a full year up until COVID exploded. And then kind of everything went crazy. And so I ended up kind of taking a gap year from there and kind of took the time to really kind of disseminate what I wanted to do. One of the things that I was always fortunate in our conversations that we had was, what is it that you want to do? Like, what drives you? But something that we always talked about that I'll never forget was that, you need to look at your strengths and what makes you shine. And then don't be afraid of your weaknesses, because your weaknesses, while they may seem like they're weak points, they're not. They're really areas of improvement where you can make yourself grow even more. And so that was something that always stuck with me in my development with you, that carried me into that role. And then, like I said, once COVID kind of happened, it was like, okay, what do I want to do next? Where do I want to go? And I knew that working in leasing, I was a leasing consultant while they were in that time of COVID, and also working at Walmart. I knew that that's not where I wanted to be a full-term. Housing and res life has always been, student affairs has always been my thing. I'm still on my journey of trying to become a dean of students. So I ended up coming across another opportunity back in higher ed here at Mount St. Mary's University, and came in 2021. And I've been here, like I said, finishing up my second year. And my role is currently the Associate Director of Residence Life and Housing Operations. And I've just really been enjoying the ride. It's been great. So that's kind of where my journey has led me from grad school up to now. And again, I owe it all to my start with Dr. Tasia, because she was phenomenal as a supervisor. She encouraged me daily. We had so much fun. And from there, it's history.
So how would you describe the difference between leadership and management?
I think what comes to mind for me, trying to understand which of the two and what their difference is, leadership more so is what I think is how a person carries themselves in the qualities they have to show that they're able to point people in the right direction, mold them, shape them, and really groom them to be their best self. Or management is just sort of kind of like being in charge and kind of letting a person, I don't want to say be who they are, but kind of like just managing the day-to-day operations and kind of helping them navigate through that. Leadership has always been something that I felt that has been a thing that I've kind of really wanted to make sure that I've gotten really deep embedded in my career, because I started off supervising resident assistants. I've had the opportunity to supervise peers, but not so much on the number of RAs that I've had. But I've found that in my time of doing it, I've been more so managing them instead of really leadership and developing them. And that's something that I'm hoping, as I continue to matriculate in my career in higher education, that I have that ability to really mold, shape, position people to have those leadership skills so that they feel empowered to be their best, true, and authentic selves, which I think that's really what separates leaders and managers. Leaders really hone into what a person's strength is. So I've done a strength quest a couple of times to see what my 5 leadership think qualities are, which empowerment is one of them. Was activator is another one that I can think of right off the top of my head. But that's what leaders do. Like, leaders find the way to really hone in on their flock versus managers who just kind of like manage the business stuff of it and not really, it's not that they're not in tune to who they're managing, but they're more so focused on those types of things, where leaders are more personal. So that's what the difference is for me. That.
Yeah. And it's funny, I talked about Strengths Quest in a previous episode about like, you know, one of the important things of understanding your leadership style is to also understand like what your strengths are. And so it's funny that you brought that up, because I talked about that and, you know, gave the premise of like, I have no connection to Strengths Quest, but it was just one of those things that I thought was like really helpful to understand like my own style, or like what my strengths were, and like how that, you know, interwoven into like what my leadership style is. But I would totally agree in terms of like, you know, what you shared about, you know, the differences between like leadership and management, right? You know, the leaders are much more people oriented and trying to get a sense for like, you know, how can I mold these people? How can I put them in the right places? Where management is more about, you know, the tasks and the business and like, you know, how do we get this thing done? And, you know, how do I, you know, get people to work harder, not necessarily motivate them, but just to like get more out of them. And so that's something that I've talked about quite a bit in earlier episodes about those two differences of like, you know, the leadership versus the management style. And so it sounds like for you, you're like, your preference or you strive to be more on the leadership side.
Yes, right? Yes. Yeah, because I mean, I think when it comes to managing, like, I mean, I look at it for like priorly, I mean, I'm kind of managing the day-to-day operations of our office in terms of housing. So that's a given. But I think what's important as a leader is, even though I might not have a direct person that reports to me, I'm still finding ways to help lead and guide others in the office. So that's why I say, like, for me, it's really important that I know and I'm in tune of what my own leadership qualities are, like you said, so that way you're able to kind of notice that in other people, because activator is one of them. Like, what activates me, what charges me, what rejuvenates me, but also what can take me to the edge or what can take me to the deep end is kind of like the two major things. And when you're managing an office or when you're managing a staff of people, not only do you have to be in tune to that, but you also have to see if you can see that in someone else so you can know how to help manage or lead them when you're having to manage the situation that they're dealing with, in a sense. So yes, those two also go hand in hand, but I do lean more towards the leadership and the management piece. Yes.
And I think you bring up an excellent point that, like, you don't necessarily have to be in a leadership role to be a leader.
Mm-hmm.
That's, one of the things I highlighted in my last episode, because technically I'm in a role where I don't supervise people, but it's still a leadership role in the sense that people come to me for guidance and, look to me for advice. And so it sounds like for you, it's very similar in that you don't have people who directly report to you, but you're still in a leadership role because of your influence.
Yeah.
What would you say is your leadership philosophy?
A true leader is one who's not afraid to be vulnerable when necessary, but has a high level of self-awareness and a high level of intuitivity that is infectious, or to make a change or to make a difference is someone who's passionate and to really get involved in what you're doing. So like my leadership philosophy spans around that. And it's like a person who's not afraid to get their hands dirty to help the cause. Like you're not just someone that's barking orders. You're there to lend a hand, and you're not afraid to be vulnerable and to be authentic and true, because your team or your core, they're only as strong as you are as a leader. And if you're afraid to be vulnerable, or if you're afraid to be your true and authentic self, then trying to expect that from your subordinates or whatever, you're setting yourself up for a loss in a sense, because what you're asking for may not come at the level that it should, because you're afraid to make those changes or be vulnerable yourself. So a strong leader is someone who's not afraid to be vulnerable in those moments, but has a high level of self-awareness and that they're infectious and they make a difference with who they're working with.
Absolutely. I don't know if you remember this, but like one of the things that I would put in like my expectations is like, I'm not going to ask you to do something that I'm not willing to do myself. Right.
Yes.
And
yes.
it's that
yes.
same premise. And
yes.
I remember specifically, like there was a situation with one of your buildings and like we had to do fire walks because there was like something
yes.
with the alarm system. And
yes.
I was like, okay, so I'm going to take this shift. And you just looked at me like, wait, what? And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to take a shift. Like this, like your building is my building. Like,
right.
It's like, so it's not just you and your staff, like, you know, doing everything. Like, you know, we're all going to have a hand in this in some way because we're a team. It's not just like, oh, that's your issue. You figure it out. Like, I feel like, you know, for the people who take that approach of like, you know, well, that's you and your situation. Like it, I don't know, it creates a level of like separation, and it really takes away like a leader's opportunity to like be, like you said, vulnerable, or even be like just showing some humility. In many ways.
Yeah, I think it also, too, looking back on it, is it shows how quickly silos can form. And, you know, I didn't realize that early in my career, but as I've traveled and worked at different places and I've seen it, it's like if you have leaders who aren't willing to kind of like get in there and like almost boots on the ground, then you allow that environment to happen where, okay, I'm only going to be focused on my area. I may come to you if I need you, or if I might not. But it's almost like to say, no, I got it, or whatever. You create a silo that you can run it by yourself and you don't need help. And teamwork makes the dream work. When you work in a smaller office, it's like, I remember it was the 5 of us. And I mean, it was like, yeah, we had a large area, but even though we each had our own areas, we all at some point or another weren't afraid to kind of like get in there and really help each other out when there were tough times or when something was happening. But that was an expectation that you had of us. And that was always something that I've always valued and always looked for in places that I'm at, because if I want to work by myself, and that's not to say that's what remote working is for, but that's kind of what that's for. you work in a place because you want to have that team camaraderie, you want that atmosphere to be there. Yeah, you want the opportunity to be able to lead and manage in your own way, but that support and knowing that your leader is there to do that, it keeps those silos from happening. And I definitely appreciate that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I would say I feel like a lot of people take for granted like how intentional you have to be to avoid silos. Like you really have to like put in that work. And that's something I talked about I talked about that in sort of 2 episodes. It was like so much that I was like, we need to split this up because like there's so much that goes into like developing teams. But one thing that I learned that I thought was really interesting is that even if you use the same recipe, like you may not necessarily get the same results. And so what I mean by that is like, when we started, because I forgot to mention this early on, like, when we started, like I technically hadn't started my job when we hired you. Like I was just starting or was sort of in that transition of like leaving my job in New York and then, moving to PA. And so it's like, all right, so we're all starting together, like clean slate. And then, I'm going to try this and see how it goes with the trainings and the team bonding and things like that. And it worked out really well. And so 2 years later, tried that exact same thing. And I got a very different result. Wow. Not that it was bad. Like that team was really, really close. Like they bonded really well. The difference was that like for Penny and I, we weren't necessarily part of that bond, even though we did literally like the retreat and the activities and the Lost at Sea, like all of that was part of it. But yet like they built a really strong bond, which I'm very grateful for because, who wants to have a team that's like all
over the place.
Right?
Yeah.
And even to the point where like our person who was at the field station had a really close bond. So like, I feel like in many ways, like even though it was a different result, it was still a really good result.
Funny you mention that because I remember it wasn't like that at first with us because we were trying to develop that with the field station person. Not that it was done on purpose that Taylor was there and we were on campus, but you as our leader, you still try to find ways to incorporate her. And I think that's what allowed for that bond that you're talking about to have happened later because of the efforts that you were doing on a consistency basis. It even reminded me of when you introduced the residential curriculum our second year. Like that was not what we had the first year. So it was almost like the intentionality as you being our leader, even though you were new when I got there and we got through our first year and it worked out or whatever, we still found a way to like take it to the next level, which set the tone for what was to come. Even though it was different, the recipe was different, the methodology was still the same.
Very interesting. Like, you can try different things. I think the important part is like intentionality. Like you were saying, like you just have to be intentional with like what you're doing, especially when it comes to like building teams. And I feel like too often we can forget about that. It's just like, all right, we're just going to put these people together and, it's all going to work out. And it's like, that is not how you make a team.
Not at all.
Actually, sort of a side note, but so one of the episodes I talked about our very, very first like team building activity with the RAs when we went to the high ropes course and how I was not part of the high ropes course, but to do that last part, the coaching that literally everyone had to do to like get me to go up that ladder, that rope ladder, and then drop down. Oh my gosh. And so like in the episode, like I spilled it all out, like how I got halfway up and was like, nope, I can't do this. And everyone's like, no, keep going. You got this. Hey,
yeah.
Keep going. And so like, that was kind of cool. Because like we had literally just met them the night before and here they are like coaching me up this rope ladder. And that first year was just magical in itself. Just like how it all came together, from beginning to end, of like starting with us being new and getting to know each other, and then the RAs, and then by the end of it, me bawling at the banquet, but all good times.
Yeah. Yes, bawling when I got my Lost Lamb award. I'll never forget that.
Yes, that was that year. The next year was the Shark Repellent award.
Yeah, yes. I got the Shark Repellent my second year. The Lost Lamb was my first year.
Which I did talk about paper plate awards as well in that episode as like a team bonding.
It's funny because nowhere else have we done paper plate awards.
Really?
So that's been yes. Nowhere else have we done that. And that's also, I said, that's another magical thing, because it's like there's always a methodology to the madness, in a sense, of why we do certain things. And you don't understand, but the value that it holds later was why we can remember these things. Like, we're talking about it 7 years later, but like nowhere else have we done the Paper Plates Awards. And so I really attribute my journey in leadership, like I said, to the things that you've done, because you kind of set the foundation and a sense of like what really can happen if you are truly in tune to the people that you're leading, because that then stems off of how they lead. Like, I remember my staff that I had, and not to really pull out any names, but I had a few my first year who were a little rough around the edges, that I had to really be intentional with, kind of getting them to get on board with how I was leading our team. And I remember something that has stuck with me in all of my years since then is like, not only do you have to be clear and concise but what's your expectation, but there has to be a realm of grace that you offer and extend to. And you are able to really extend that more when you know your team. And so like the way that you got to know us, I had to get to know them. And for some of them, I still keep in contact with them to this day. And I think it's because that, again, talking about that intentionality, you get to know them, they're able to do what you want or able to perform in the way that you want them to perform. But I had a foundation. So it takes that foundation, which makes great leaders as well.
Yes, I agree. Sort of switching gears a little bit, what do you feel like is your criteria for determining like whether or not you've made a good contribution to like one's leadership or just contribution in general? Like, how do you know, that I've done something, I've made an impact?
First thing that comes to mind is the results. So like, I can think back to a situation early in my career, and I'll never forget it. I was actually sharing this with a colleague the other day. So starting at a new position, I walked into a situation where the RA staff was not happy with the terms and conditions that they were expected to perform or do. So me being the new employee, they shared those terms and grievances with me. But me being new, it was kind of like, okay, I hear you, but we have to get ready for opening. And so we got all the way up until opening, and they decided that we're not happy with what, was being presented to us. So therefore, we're not going to help you guys with opening. So brand new into a role, I had to open a residence hall of over 1,000 students by myself on move-in day. And I was met with challenge after challenge after challenge. But instead of me throwing in a towel, having a panic attack or whatever, I did my best to help each person move in, answer whatever questions the parents had. And I can remember, even though my time was short there, I can still remember a note that I received from one of the parents that basically said, we recognize that you had a very chaotic situation that you were dealing with, but you still remained professional. You still helped us. And we really, really appreciated that. I ended up getting a gift card out of it and some chocolate chip cookies, because they knew my chocolate chip cookies were my favorite. And that particular example was just a reaffirming thing that sometimes you're met with situations and you have to really put on your leadership hat and kind of like lead by example. Like, you're expecting your team to help you and be there to support you, but when they don't, the show must go on. You still have to do what's necessary. And that has been something that stuck with me in terms of that. It's like, I know that I've made an impact, or I know I've done what needed to be done or best exemplified, or what I needed to exemplify based on the results that I've gotten. Something else that has been formative in my career that I know that I've made an impact is the overall change of the scope. So I had to create an in-service project for our resident assistants at my first professional job so that our RAs could get ongoing professional development. It wasn't something that the school had done before. No one figured out what to do, and I just took on the task. And I don't know if they still do it today, but me taking the ownership and creating that prepared me for being able to elevate my career later in life to doing some of the things that I've done. And I attest that to re-educating the administration and the population, because the definition of an RA was seen as a glorified babysitter when a resident in the system is not a babysitter. And then why they need these skills. If I didn't give that contribution, the administration wouldn't have known what an RA was. The students wouldn't have recognized, oh, I could go to my RA because I'm having a hard time with academics, or I'm having a hard time connecting because of personal family issues, or I need somebody to talk to, or I just need to get some things off of my chest. Or, I mean, granted, you're not going to be my best friend, but I learned how to develop a mutual respect for somebody who's a peer like myself. I too can be an RA. And that was the first time that I ever really saw the role evolve. When I got to you, I remember we did the fishbowl analogy. And that was the first time that I had ever heard that used. But I remember that was something that I introduced to them about always being mindful that you're always looked at. I didn't call it the fishbowl term then, but you took it a step further with us, and that's something that has stuck with me. So again, it's little things like that have set me apart and really put me in a place going forward in my professional career that showed future supervisors that I had the ability to take something and create something for the good of something that would help make our offices or our departments beneficial later. And that led to opportunities speaking at conferences, that led to being in charge of RA training when I was with you. And it really made me a marketable person now that I look back on it, because there's a lot of people who start out in this role that don't necessarily have those skills. And I learned that within my first couple of months. It's little things like that have reaffirmed that whatever contribution that I have given or whatever I've learned has been able to transfer and carry me further into this career, which that's what should happen. Because if you're not learning and you're not growing where you are, then there's a problem, not only with who you're working with, but also you're part of that problem, because you should be taking those steps to learn those things. And I remember vividly this conversation that you had with me as my supervisor, that what you put in is what you get out. So you have to invest in yourself, as well as the expectation of me investing in you for your professional development. And that was just something that reaffirmed that.
Thank you. And that's funny. I touched on that quite a bit in my last episode of it's our responsibility to continue to educate ourselves, to continue to grow, to continue to take in knowledge, because the world is changing, people change. So it's up to us to sort of keep up with that. Otherwise, we're going to constantly have challenges, and, there's no room for us to be proactive if we're just responding to what's happening. And the best way to be proactive is to really do your part of getting the knowledge that you need, or just being open to new information so that you're able to apply it, as opposed to just saying, I don't need anything else. I have everything. I've done everything. And then, you sort of close yourself off to other possibilities. And, again, it just leads to more friction later.
Absolutely.
So what would you say is something that you wish you had learned earlier in your career that, now, but you're sort of I wish that I knew this earlier?
The first thing that comes to mind is it's okay to make mistakes as long as those mistakes don't define you and cripple you to where you don't grow. I look back at early in my career and I say this, as a matter of fact, I said this yesterday. I know that if I had to rate my level of self-awareness in the beginning of my career, it was probably somewhere between a 1 and 5, where the scale is 1 in 10. And so 1 in 5 is pretty bad, because 1, you're oblivious to it all. You have no idea what you're doing, and you're not even trying to know. 5 is you have an idea of what your level of self-awareness is. You recognize there's a level of growth that needs to happen. You're just not sure how to get there. And I think that had someone said that to me in the very beginning, when I first started out in this role, that it's okay to make mistakes as long as those mistakes don't define you and cripple you to where you won't have the ability to grow, or you don't have the desire to grow, I would have never gotten it the way I've gotten it now. I could say on a scale from 1 to 10, my level of self-awareness is almost out of 10. And I'm not boasting in that. It's just I am so in tune into how I present myself, what I say, how I respond, and I'm constantly given disclaimers. But again, you're on a journey. You're learning who you are as a person. You're learning who you are as a supervisor, as a manager. You're going to make mistakes. You're not perfect. Every school is different. The culture is different. What might be acceptable at one place is not acceptable at another place. Language, whether it's verbal, nonverbal, all those things. And I think that because I've had the experiences that I've had over the 9 years, I've recognized that the most important thing that I needed to have really sharp was my level of self-awareness. And had somebody also told me, and I say that to say, had somebody told me that self-awareness is important to have, I think I might not have made some of the mistakes that I made, and my level of self-awareness would have been a lot higher earlier in my career than it is now. So definitely that.
Yeah, that's oof. Like self-wellness is so important for everything.
And it wasn't that I was selfish. I mean, I think back to when we were together. Whenever I came into your office, you were always, okay, like, tell me what's going on. Tell me why you did this. How are you feeling? And it's not that you didn't touch into the self-awareness piece. I think you might have said it in different ways or whatever, but I think I didn't realize it until after I left working with you and I went on to the other schools and the other experiences that I had, that it was like, okay, Kevin, like, you need to think about these things. You need to think about what was your intent, what's your intent, and how it's being interpreted by everyone else. And again, sometimes you don't get that opportunity to really think about that until you're having to take time away and really reevaluate what you want to do, where you want to go, and how you want it to propel you to get there. And it's like I said, I'm very fortunate where I'm at now. I'm in a great place. I have a great team that I work with. They allow me to be my true, authentic self. I don't have to explain too much why I say or do or act the way I am. I mean, not that I'm doing anything bad or whatever, but I mean, I work in ministry. So they know I'm an ordained minister. They know I have a love for God. They know my passion level for students is through the roof. I give disclaimers, not necessarily to be defensive or anything like that, but to make it known, like, this is why I'm doing or I'm saying what I'm saying or doing. So that way, my intent is always known. I don't want anyone to think I'm selfish. You can't be selfish in this field. You're working with people. You're performing a service to people. So you always have to be in tune to what the needs of the people that you're serving are. And it goes back to what we talked about in the very beginning, like leadership. You're only as strong as your leader. And if you have a strong leader, if you have a strong foundation, that empowers you to be strong and delegate and empower others. And you're able to just really be who you are and really make a difference. And that self-awareness is something that if you don't have it, you got to find it. So anybody out there that's early in their career, and you need that. And I that is something that I wish. And again, Tasia is amazing. It's not saying that she didn't do this, but it's something that I wish someone really pulled me to the side and say, you need to really fine tuning that, because that's going to make or break your career. That's going to define who you are. And it's going to set you apart. Your resume can be spot on. You can have all the accolades. But if you don't have self-awareness, you're not going to really be able to make a difference with the people that you're working with, because people are going to always try to figure out who you are, what you're trying to do, and what difference you're trying to make. And if they already know that because they have gotten a chance to know you, it makes having to figure that out that much less, and you're able to really enjoy the work that you do on an everyday basis.
I feel like what you've just said can apply to just anyone everywhere. Like, it doesn't matter what type of field you're working in, like having that self-awareness is so crucial. And it's funny, like, to your point, like, it's something I didn't know what it was yet, but I was like, sort of like scratching at it. It's like having these questions, these reflective questions were leading to something, but I think you named it. So thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Like that's what it is. It's like getting that self-awareness, because, you have to understand who you are and how you portray yourself and what you bring to a situation to understand how that fits into all of it. So that's really crucial to have that understanding as early on in your career as possible. So thank you.
No problem. Thank you for that question.
In relationship to self-awareness, I think it's also important to think about, like, our experiences like that we've had and how that also contributes to, who we are. Like I vaguely remember like us having a conversation. I was asking you a similar question of like, what was your objective with something? And then it was connected back to like a previous supervisor who was like very hard on you about things. And so for me, that was a moment of awareness of like, oh, like this, this doesn't have anything to do with me and how I'm supervising you. It has to do with like, what this other person did and like how that sort of conditioned you to respond a certain way to things. And then, creating a space for us to unpack that in our one-on-one sessions, which were always very long, but also very informative.
Yes, they were. But you know what? I think about that now because I still have one-on-ones, and I'm always mindful of time because, time is important. But sometimes, you can't really restrict those, especially when you're unpacking a lot of things. And I do remember there were times that we had to unpack before we could really get into the meat of what it was we needed to discuss, because whatever I was conditioned to know or how to lead or how to supervise before I came to you, not to say that it wasn't the best or the right way to do it, but it was just that's all I knew. And you found a way, even though sometimes it took 25 minutes, you found a way to really unpack that and help me see it from a different lens. I don't know if I would be in the position that I'm in today with being able to do that for others. Because, a lot of times now it's like I process. So for me, instead of outwardly vocalizing, I'm internally processing. So my body language may speak and say one thing, but internally I'm saying something else. And sometimes that can be misconstrued too, because again, people are only seeing what they see. So they're trying to interpret based on what they see. But the skills that I took away from our sessions are why I do that now, because I actually think about things now. I didn't think about things early in my career. It was more so reactive instead of being proactive. So like you said, it took doing that early on for me to be able to benefit and use that now. And had I not had those skills, I don't think I would be as successful as I am today because of you doing that.
Any words of wisdom, like something that you would want, that you feel like highlights like your leadership story and, just where you see yourself going?
Well, definitely where I see myself going, like I shared in the beginning, I'm still on my path to becoming a dean of students. And I was just having a conversation with a colleague just yesterday that I never forget the importance of expanding your portfolio. So if I have to leave a piece of advice, it would be don't be afraid to expand your portfolio and step outside of your comfort zone in a sense. The way I've seen it in my 9 years of experience, a dean of students is someone that knows how to really get to know the individuals that they're working with. They interact with the students, they interact with parents, they interact with stakeholders. They are part of the decision making that affect a larger conglomerate, and they also are very visible. And so because of those things, I've placed myself in positions to where I'm very visible. I can recall when I was at RLC, I went to all my students' games and things of that nature. I started doing that there, and that's something that stuck with me when I was at RLC. I was very vocal to advocate for students when I was a part of BSU. And funny story, Tasia, I was the BSU advisor this past year here at the school, and I attributed that to my experience working with you, kind of co-advising in a sense, even though I wasn't their advisor on record. But it started there at Juniata. Like I said, I get to know students, I get to know parents, I talk to parents, and I try to build those lasting relationships with coaches and different things of that nature, because I've recognized that stepping into that role, you have to have those skills already established so that when you're having to make decisions, when you're having to be at an event or whatever, it's not something that seems foreign to you. So I've positioned myself, I continue to make myself marketable. I think back to one of our conversations that we had, and I talked about how I wanted to go into housing operations. And you asked me, why do you want to go into that? What's the reason that you want to go into that? And I think I said something on the lines of like, I wanted to be more marketable, or I was alluding to the fact that I was trying to diversify myself, because I always felt like if you lock yourself in one entity, it's hard for you to get those skills that you need that will help you. I've done work in conduct. I've done work in res life. I've done housing operations. I've done training on top of the other experiences that I've had. I'm former military. I've worked in retail, sales, corporate America, fast food, restaurant. And so because I've done all these things, I took a non-traditional route into residence life. I mean, many people ask me all the time, like, how did you get into res life? I wasn't an RA in college. I wanted to be an RA in college. I took the class and I didn't pass the class, but I still found a way to get into res life. And I'm glad I didn't take the traditional route in a sense, because I have a story that's different from a person who was an RA in college that has become a dean of students and they took that route. So I say that to say, never be afraid to expand and diversify your portfolio, because it's only making you that much more marketable. And the end, that the skills that you gain are what's going to make you your shining light. So expanding your portfolio is key.
Yeah. And I would also just emphasize, like what you were saying, like, you know, everyone has like a different path, right? And so, you know, for a lot of people, they may feel like there's this traditional path to something, and that's not always true. Like,
and I used to think like that. I used to think like that. Yeah. I used to think like that early in my career. I thought I had to be, I don't know if I told you this, but I had this conversation with my supervisor after you. I thought I had to be an RLC and then be a community manager and then become an area manager, then become an assistant director, to become a director. See, I thought I had to go through those different echelons. And my supervisor after you, he was like, no, like you can take all types of paths to get there, but it's what those experiences that you take, you have to be able to connect the dots as to how those experiences have led you to where you are. And so definitely, it's that you don't have to, it's not, even though there's a traditional way, a step up the ladder, you don't always have to walk up the ladder as the ladder. That's why there's different paths to different things. So.
Right. Like you could take the steps if you don't want to do the ladder. Like,
yep. I mean, you can take the elevator too. I mean,
right.
It's just, you better have some luggage to get on that elevator, because if you just get on the elevator by yourself and you don't have no luggage with you, they're going to probably be looking at you like, well, where's your baggage? And I say that to not to be funny, but for that baggage is your experience. You got to have some experience that shows why you are going to be in that top position if you didn't travel the steps. So.
Absolutely. I think that is a great analogy.
I just thought of that on the spot. No credit there. I just thought of that on the spot.
It was perfect.
Thanks.
Final thoughts.
I'm honored that, you remembered me. I'll tell anybody, I've had some good supervisors. I've had some great supervisors, and I've had some fantastic supervisors. And I can honestly say that you are one of, if not the best supervisor, especially early in my career. Early in my career, you were the best supervisor that I had. And I think I told you that multiple times in our one-on-ones. Your personality, your intentionality, your care, your passion, it always preceded you entering in a room. It was never a question of, okay, is she for me? Is she against me? Does she care about my well-being? Does she care about my growth and development? And I think that's key. It has been key. It's been very instrumental. It's been a quality that I've looked for in any supervisor moving forward that I've had, because, like I said, you got me at a very early part of my career. I was 2 years out of grad school. I was just getting started. I didn't have the greatest experience when I came to you, but you found a way to mold me and shape me and to make me this ball of energy that was fearless, that didn't mind having fun at work, that found a way to be who I am, be me, not be afraid of that, and to come out of my shell, that I don't know how successful I would have been. I don't say this very loosely or candid or feminist or misogynistic in any way, but sometimes it takes having a supervisor outside of your gender to really have that nature and to have that, to be like, okay, how can I support you? I mean, my first supervisor was a guy. He was an older guy. And not to say that he didn't care, but he didn't care the way that you cared. And then my next supervisor after you, yes, it was a guy, but he had some of the same qualities that you had, which made it amazing to work with. And then my supervisor after him, not to say that she didn't have those qualities, but it was very hard for us to find that common ground. And then the supervisors that I have now have the same qualities and same, characteristics that you have. And I don't know if this was recorded or not, but I have a photo of our staff and our time together on my desk that is a constant reminder of the times that we spent together. And it always reminds me of how important my foundation was. And I never am able to forget where I came from and how I got to where I got to because of that. And I think that that's instrumental. So again, whoever's listening to this podcast, she's great. She's amazing. I can say so much about her and the work that she's doing. It's formidable. And
Thank you.
I'm glad that she chose to have me on the show today to share my journey with you on something that I wish my boss had said to me early in my career, because she has really exemplified the importance of having that is. And if it wasn't for her early in my career, I don't think I would have been as successful. So maybe another show is someone instead of something. The importance of having someone that you have in your career in the beginning to make you successful, because if it wasn't for her, I don't think I would be as successful as I am today. So thank you again, Tasia.
Thank you. And I feel like you just reiterate, what I'm constantly talking about. I talked about it in my very first episode and second, and even the last episode. It's like one of my intentions is to build other leaders, to build, conscious leaders. And I know that in order to do that, I have to do that. I have to exemplify those same qualities that I would want for other people to have, because, like I've had some supervisors who were not so great, who, didn't take the time to develop me, or didn't, put in the effort to try to get to know me and understand my strengths and, how I could fit in different areas. And so because of that, I recognize that there's a need for that, because when you take that time to get to know your people and put them in the right places, that leads to longevity. And, that leads to their continued success, right? So it's not just about what I can get out of you, it's about what you can get out of, our interaction together. And so, I feel like this entire episode has been you sharing what you've gotten out of our time together. So thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so let's go ahead and start this episode's gratitude list. So first, I am thankful for Kevin and his willingness to share his story with us here on this podcast. Thank you so much for your time and just your willingness to share your story with us, and for just all that you've done to contribute to my own leadership journey. I am also grateful for just everyone that was part of our team when we worked together. As you shared throughout this episode, we were a pretty solid team, and there was a lot of intentionality and a lot of fun and, a lot of great things that came from that. And so I know I've thanked them in previous episodes, but I feel like having you here now is the perfect opportunity for me to just share my gratitude for what we created as a team. So thank you all. And so for this episode's affirmation, I wanted to base it off of something that you shared, because I feel like these affirmations are sort of my takeaway for my listeners when they repeat it to themselves or when they write it down. And so one of the things that you highlighted quite a bit was self-awareness. And so for this episode, the affirmation is, self-awareness is my superpower. Because as you shared, having that understanding of who we are, how we show up, and what we bring to a situation is so crucial. And so I appreciate that you brought it up. I know it's something that I've talked about previously, but based on what you've shared, I feel like it's so important for our growth and our development overall. And so thank you for that piece of insight. And my hope is that all of you listening can truly understand and appreciate how valuable self-awareness is as a superpower. And so that wraps up this episode. I hope that this was helpful. And as always, thank you so much for listening and have a great day. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Things My Boss Never Told Me. Before you go, please make sure that you like and subscribe down below. Also, I included a few recommended videos for you to check out. Thank me later.